Gordon, you are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Over the last few years, few subjects have caused as much controversy as the investigations into historic cases of child abuse. The issue is a minefield for survivors, for police and, frankly, for journalists. Over time, rumours become reality and facts are too easily dismissed as fantasy. How do you disentangle all this to find the truth? Well, that's what Justice Goddard has set herself up to do in a public inquiry that gets underway this month and will last years. She has prioritised a handful of cases that need urgent attention, and one of them is the London borough of Lambeth. Unlike other stories you've heard, there is no doubt the children's homes there were infiltrated by paedophiles. A number of men have been convicted and jailed. That is astonishing in itself. But there is a lingering feeling the police didn't uncover everything. Tonight, we set out one small part of the Lambeth story. It's an important episode that involves the police, a minister, and a thorny dilemma. Detectives had been investigating a man for child abuse, and as they looked into his case, they were told the suspect seemed to know a government minister. There was no suggestion the minister had done anything wrong. But should the police talk to him to see if he could help the inquiry? Was that reasonable? Well, in fact, Scotland Yard chose not to approach him, and that baffled some people, including one experienced Met detective. Why give the minister a wide berth? So did detectives make the right call? But there's another important twist, because detectives weren't dealing with any member of the government. To understand the sensitivities here, we need to explain who he was and the job he held. The minister was Paul Boateng, Home Office Minister in charge of the police. A man who had made his name as a lawyer criticising the Met. Well, over the last 18 months, we've approached all the key people in this saga, including Lord Boateng himself. But this film doesn't draw conclusions. It asks questions that still haven't been answered for 2 decades. Here's Nick Hopkins.
The borough of Lambeth in South London, a prime focus for the independent inquiry into child sex abuse led by Justice Lowell Goddard. Her team will look at what went on in children's care homes here more than 30 years ago and review decisions taken by the police that are still contentious today. Perhaps none more so than what led to the removal of an officer from a sensitive inquiry and what happened to the information he had. And at the heart of this story is one fundamental issue: the uneasy relationship between the police and those in power.
Now, I did 34 and a half years in the Metropolitan Police Service. I'm immensely proud to have been a police officer and immensely proud to be a Metropolitan Police Officer, but this is the one period in my career which just troubles me greatly.
In 1998, Clive Driscoll was a detective working on a delicate case. Police in Liverpool had arrested a man called John Carroll. He was accused of offences in Liverpool and Lambeth. Carroll had been the manager of a children's care home in Lambeth, and Driscoll's job was to pick up the London end of the inquiry. Was there more to follow up? He thought there was. And among several potential witnesses he wanted to talk to was this man, Paul Boateng, a rising star in Tony Blair's government. Approaching any minister would have been awkward, but speaking to Boateng would have been particularly so. He had just been appointed Minister in charge of the police. Newsnight has spent 18 months investigating what happened in this borough back then. And one thing's for sure, it's as controversial now as it ever was. This story begins with Driscoll's investigation, Operation Trawler. The prime focus of inquiries was this man, John Carroll. He would eventually plead guilty to 35 charges of indecent assault and buggery of young boys in the 1970s and 80s. He was sentenced to 10 years in jail. Police in London continued to look into Carroll's past. They wanted to be sure the full extent of his abuse in Lambeth care homes had been uncovered. It was becoming clear there were still people who might be able to shed light on his activities. Driscoll investigated through the autumn of 1998. These confidential papers record the work he was undertaking. Driscoll was told Carroll liked to get among well-known people in the local community, dignitaries, police officers, councillors. 2 witnesses Driscoll spoke to mentioned the name of one particularly prominent individual Carroll appeared to have met in this way. We have spoken to both of them. One was a former social worker who'd worked under Carroll at the Angel Road care home. Her name was Teresa Johnson. Her identity has never been revealed before. She told us she had seen many visitors come and go from the home. One of them, she says, was Paul Boateng. She says she saw him on up to 6 occasions and once spoke to him in the reception area.
And by the office there was a table with a visitor's book, and everybody that comes into the home has to sign the visitor's book. I said, "Excuse me, can you sign the visitor's book?" And he signed it.
You saw his name on there?
Yeah.
The second person who had spoken to Driscoll was a youth worker from a local charity which ran annual caravan holidays for young people in care. He told us John Carroll attended these camps, and he remembered many local dignitaries visiting or helping out too. One of them, he says, was Paul Boateng.
John Carroll would regularly talk about him being able to open doors for him. John Carroll was someone who believed that he should have been someone far more significant.
You definitely, from your own recollections, you saw John Carroll with this man?
Definitely.
On how many occasions?
Quite a few.
There was a third piece of information in Driscoll's files. In the mid-1980s, John Carroll attempted to foster children. Lambeth supported the application, but needed a neighbouring borough, Southwark, to second it. Southwark refused. Why? Because they discovered that Carroll already had a conviction for child abuse dating back to the 1960s. Southwark couldn't believe that Lambeth Council knew about this and hadn't sacked him. Newsnight has been told the decision provoked a bitter row between the 2 councils. We've been told that a few days later, the official who took the decision to block the fostering application received a phone call from a man who identified himself as Paul Boateng, though the official couldn't be sure it was him. The caller had asked him if there was anything he could do to help resolve the row around Carroll's fostering. The offer was not taken up. There is no suggestion they were aware of Carroll's previous conviction. Driscoll told colleagues he needed to talk to Paul Boateng in case he could shed light on Carroll's activities. And then, to his astonishment, he was axed. One of those who knew Driscoll was about to approach Boateng was the senior Lambeth official, Nigel Goldie. But Goldie thought the detective had told too many people about his plans. He says he raised his concerns within Lambeth Council. Within days, Goldie had been spoken to by another police officer called Richard Gargini. Goldie says Gargini told him to forget about Driscoll and his leads.
Clive had been suspended from the investigation. He was going to be disciplined. He'd been interviewed and found that he had nothing, and that to all intents and purposes the matter should be regarded as completely closed, and nothing more would be done about it, and that it should be left, and that I should not speak to anyone about it. I should just keep not. Were
you surprised that he'd been removed?
I was surprised, yes, because I was not expecting that kind of drastic action.
Driscoll is also bemused. For him, any claim that the product of his investigation had come to nothing didn't make sense. He says he hadn't told Mr. Gargini who he wanted to speak to or why. Did Driscoll get what he deserved? Or was this just a good excuse to get him out before he stirred up a political hornet's nest? A secret internal Scotland Yard report says Driscoll committed serious indiscretions. But it also refers to the political sensitivities that resulted in his removal from Lambeth. Like many senior officers at Scotland Yard, Driscoll had his critics, and he admits he can be a bit of a bull in a china shop. But the disciplinary proceedings against him were quickly dropped, and his career soared.